This episode may shatter what you thought you knew about the lowest depths of human nature. Just how low can the moral bottom line go? As the father of a 6-year-old girl, while writing the script for this case, I already felt intense physical and psychological discomfort.
At 3:30 p.m. on November 2nd, 2020, in Chongqing, China, a sudden, thunderous crash, like something heavy hitting the ground, rang out from outside an apartment building. Immediately after, people heard a woman screaming frantically, "Whose child fell down?" At that moment, in the residential complex's landscaped greenbelt, 2 very young children lay in a pool of blood, their bodies twitching. The 2 children were a sister and her younger brother. The sister was 2.5 years old, and the brother had just turned 1.5. While the neighbors downstairs were still frozen in shock, a man wearing dark-colored pajamas hurried down the stairs, rushed to the children, and began beating his chest, wailing loudly in tears. This man was the children's father, Zong Bo. To anyone who didn't know better, it really might have looked like a father blaming himself for not watching his children and causing an accident.
But what happened next made the whole situation turn strange.
After Zong came downstairs, he just cried in place and showed no intention of calling an ambulance. Logically, when a child's life is hanging by a thread, even if there's only a 1 in 10,000 chance of survival, a parent should call an ambulance first and do everything possible to save them. But Zong didn't do that. He just stood there crying and did nothing.
Before any of the onlooking neighbors could even speak up to remind him, an elderly woman suddenly pushed through the crowd, grabbed Zong, and started hitting him. As she hit him, she shouted, "What did you do to the 2 children?" This elderly woman was Zong's mother, the children's grandmother. In the past, it was usually the grandmother who took care of the children's daily.
That day was a Monday. Zong should have been at work, but he said he had taken the day off and would stay home to look after the 2 children. The grandmother didn't think much of it. After cooking for the family, she went out for a walk. She never imagined that this one moment of not keeping watch would end with those 2 pitiful children falling from upstairs.
However, the scuffle didn't last long. With the neighbors' help, the ambulance quickly arrived at the scene and rushed the 2 children to the hospital. But the sister and brother were simply too severely injured. The sister had already died before the ambulance arrived, and after the brother was taken to the hospital, he died as well. His injuries were too severe, and resuscitation efforts failed.
After receiving the news, the children's mother, Chen Mei-ling, rushed to the hospital. However, she didn't even get to see her children for the last time. Upon hearing that both children had already passed away, an enraged Chen lunged at Zhang, beating him and demanding to know how such a thing could have happened. Zhang kept his eyes tightly shut, his face full of pain. No matter how much Chen hit him, he showed no intention of defending himself, and he even said deeply, "Just kill me." It wasn't until Chen calmed down that Zhang finally revealed the sequence of events. He said that he had caught a cold and, after taking some medicine, went straight to his bedroom to rest. At the time, the 2 children were happily playing in the second bedroom, and he didn't pay attention to them. Not long after he lay down, he heard a shout from downstairs. When he left his bedroom to check, he discovered that the 2 children were gone. By then, it was too late. Whether Chen beat Zhang to death or not, the 2 children wouldn't survive. They could only discuss how to handle the children's funeral arrangements. While everyone was immersed in their grief, there was one person who expressed doubts about the cause of the children's death. That person was Chen's mother, Zhao Wenli. The reason she was suspicious was because Zhang's reaction seemed too over the top. Crying and sobbing for the 2 children might be a reaction any father would have, but from Zhao Weili's understanding of Zhang, he had no emotional attachment to the children. His dramatic crying now only made the situation seem suspicious. To understand why Zhao Weili felt this way, we must go back to the troubled marriage between Zhang and Chen.
Zhang was born in 1994 to a rural family in Chongqing. His father was a bricklayer and his mother was a housewife. The family relied entirely on his father's meager wages, and life was naturally tight. Both of Zhang's parents had little education and weren't very concerned with their children's schooling. Additionally, Zhang wasn't interested in studying, and after finishing elementary school, he dropped out and never returned to school.
After drifting for a few years, he eventually found a job selling loans. In 2017, through a friend, Zhang met Chen, who was 3 years older than him. Zhang was very fond of Chen and pursued her relentlessly, with wave after wave of romantic advances. Chen's initial impression of Zhang was rather ordinary, so she didn't agree to his advances at first. However, Zhang didn't give up. Instead, he became even more persistent, waiting for her outside her office every day after work. If Chen had to work late, he would wait for her at the company until late at night. When Chen faced difficulties at work, Zhang would help her with the problems. Gradually, Chen was moved by his persistence, and they officially began their romantic relationship.
3 months after confirming their relationship, Chen found out she was pregnant. When she told Zong, his response was very mature. He said, "I respect your decision, and if you choose to keep the baby, I will do my best to take care of you and the baby." These words moved Chen to tears. So they met with both their parents and began preparing for their wedding. Zong's father had passed away years earlier, leaving only his mother. She was very pleased with her future daughter-in-law and fully supported the marriage.
However, Chen's parents weren't very satisfied with Zhang, and the reasons were quite simple. Zhang only had an elementary school education and came from a poor family, while their daughter was a college graduate. Although their family wasn't rich, they were considered middle income in Chongqing. The two were mismatched in terms of education and background, and it was inevitable that problems would arise over time. As a result, her parents tried their best to persuade Chen for a long time, but at this point, Chen truly felt Zhang's kindness toward her. Additionally, Zhang's words about respecting her reproductive rights made her believe that although Zhang had low education, it didn't mean he had poor character. So, in 2017, they got married.
During the wedding, even though Chen's parents weren't fond of Zong, they still helped him as much as they could. When they learned that Zong's family couldn't even afford the wedding expenses, they generously gave him several thousand yuan. They never imagined that this man, who swore vows of love to their daughter, would turn out to be a scumbag.
After the wedding, Chen and Zhang moved into Zhang's apartment, and the first year was relatively smooth. In March 2018, Chen gave birth to a daughter. That same year, Zhang's career also took off. He partnered with his friends to open a small loan company, and his income began to improve. Considering the help and respect his wife's family had shown him, Zhang should have at least been grateful and attentive to his wife. But he wasn't. After earning money, he became arrogant. He started to find faults with Chen, and their communication as a couple gradually decreased. Not only did he become cold and distant towards his wife, but he also neglected their daughter. Chen noticed Zong's odd behavior, but thought he was just biased against daughters, so she endured it. It wasn't until January 2019, when their son was born, that Zong's cold attitude toward Chen showed no signs of changing. Here's an additional point. The birth dates of the two children reflect Zong's attitude toward his wife. The child born in January 2019 was conceived around April 2018, just 1 month after Chen gave birth to their daughter. Getting pregnant immediately after childbirth increases health risks for both the mother and the baby, along with immense physical and psychological pressure. Experts recommend at least an 18-month gap before becoming pregnant again, but Zhang, in pursuit of his own desires, completely disregarded his wife. In April 2019, their 3-month-old son suddenly fell seriously ill, to the point where the hospital issued a critical condition notice. Chen stayed by her son's side in the hospital for over a week, and only then was her son out of danger. During this week, Zhang came to the hospital only 2 or 3 times, and each time he would just take a quick look, answer a phone call, and leave.
The long-standing cold relationship between the couple, coupled with Zhang's series of strange behaviors, became unbearable for Chen. Just as she was about to confront Zhang about the situation, Zhang beat her to it. The day before their son was discharged from the hospital, Zhang told Chen that he wanted a divorce. At this point, Chen had already given birth to 2 children for Zhang, and during this week, she had been the one to save their son's life from the brink of death.
As for Zhang, he was a far cry from the humble man who had pursued her 2 years earlier. He told Chen that he couldn't tolerate such a dull life anymore and that he wanted wealth and luxury, so he had to get a divorce.
Naturally, Chen couldn't accept this blow. To keep her family intact, for the sake of her children, she begged Zong not to divorce her, even kneeling down 3 times to plead with him. But at this point, no matter how much Chen begged, Zong ignored her completely.
After leaving the hospital, Zhang immediately deleted Chen's WeChat account and called her, insulting her by saying, "I must divorce you. Now even looking at you disgusts me."
What happened to Zhang over the past 2 years? The problem lies with a woman named Ye Changchen. During his son's illness, Zhang met her through a dating app. At the time, Zhang didn't tell Ye that he was married. He just kept inviting her out to have fun. After they became closer, Ye found out that Zhang had a family, but didn't mind. She continued to maintain a romantic relationship with him.
Yi never pressured Zhang to divorce, but Zhang himself became impatient and insisted on the divorce. There were 2 reasons for this. First, Zhang thought Yi was more beautiful than his wife. Second, Zhang learned that Yi's family was wealthier.
According to netizens, Ye's parents had been running a food factory in the area for 10 years, and the business was doing well. Many locals had purchased products from her family. When they met, Ye was still the general manager of the company.
Zhang, with his elementary school education and his job as a salesman, suddenly met Ye, a wealthy second-generation heiress. He immediately saw this as a golden opportunity. To seize it, he was willing to abandon his wife and children, planning to marry Ye.
In February 2020, after a year of struggle, Zhang finally divorced Chen. The divorce agreement was as follows. Chen would have custody of their daughter, while Zhang would have custody of their son until he turned 6, after which he would be handed over to Chen. Zhang was required to pay Chen 800,000 yuan in child support. After the divorce, Zhang got together with Ye as he had hoped, while Chen returned to her parents' home with their daughter.
Logically, Zhang had already made things so final. His children would eventually be with Chen, so there would be no reason to harm his own flesh and blood. However, the twist came from the malicious Ye.
In June 2020, Ye, wanting Zhang to prove his love for her, told him, "I won't meet your mother until the kids are dealt with. If you have children, I cannot accept that." Zhang replied, "Then don't see the 2 kids." At the time, Zhang thought Ye just didn't like his children and that avoiding them would be enough. But what Ye really wanted was for the 2 children to disappear completely.
She told Zhang, "It's impossible with children. You should figure out how to get rid of them both." Zhang's response was telling. "Both? How could that be?" In the following days, Ye continuously provoked Zhang to kill the 2 children, even using self-harm tactics to pressure him. Eventually, on October 18, 2020, Zhang agreed to get rid of the 2 children by the end of the month. Upon hearing this, Ye was ecstatic as their son was living with Zhang. She then began giving Zhang ideas on how to trick Chen into letting their daughter come to his home so that Zhang could dispose of both of them.
On October 25, 2020, Zhang had his mother contact Chen, saying he wanted to take their daughter to his house to play and buy her a dress. Chen was surprised by this request because in the year since their divorce, Zhang had never visited his daughter. The daughter had no memory of him. Though she found it odd, Chen agreed, as he was still the children's biological father. She took their daughter to Zhang's house and spent the whole day with them. During this day, Zhang behaved normally. When Chen got home and asked her daughter, "Do you like mommy or daddy more?" the daughter answered without hesitation, "Daddy." It was the first time she had seen her father since she could understand things, and she happily added, "Daddy wants me to come and play next week. I want to play with Daddy." On November 1, 2020, not wanting to disappoint her daughter, Chen took her back to Zhang's house. That day, she saw that the children's grandmother was also there, so she felt comfortable leaving. Later that evening, she received a call from Zhang, requesting that their daughter stay overnight. Hearing her daughter's happy voice on the phone, she agreed. But little did Chen know, that night would mark her final farewell to her child. On November 2, Zhang, who was supposed to be at work, did not leave the house that day. Around 3 p.m., after his mother left, Zhang immediately called Ye. At Ye's repeated urging, Zhang rushed into the second bedroom,
grabbed the two children by their feet and threw them out the window. At that moment, they showed no remorse, and Ye even replied, "They never should have existed." The two idiots thought their plan was flawless, but little did they know, the police had already noticed something suspicious and began suspecting Zhang.
There were two main reasons. First, Zhang's apartment was on the 15th floor, a high-rise building, and the window in the second bedroom was about 80 centimeters above the ground. It would have been very difficult for the young children to climb up to such a height by themselves, let alone both children falling together. The older sister was only 2.5 years old, and she didn't have the strength to carry her younger brother, let alone lift him up to the window that was 80 centimeters from the ground.
Second, the police learned from neighbors that the second bedroom originally had a metal guardrail, but at some point it had been sawed off. When these clues came together, the police decided to investigate Zhang. Upon reviewing Zhang's chat history, they made a shocking discovery. In the chat records between Zhang and Ye, the police found nearly 10,000 messages between the two, plotting to murder two children. Even after the incident, the two shamelessly expressed affection for each other. As a result, on November 10, 2020, the police arrested Zhang and Ye. When Chen learned that her two children had been murdered by Zhang, she was completely devastated. She could never have imagined that her ex-husband could be so monstrous. After the incident, some neighbors had captured the moment the two children fell from the building. When it was posted online, it did gain a lot of attention, but most people felt sorry for the two children, believing it was just an accident. No one suspected that their biological father had murdered them. As a result, the attention eventually faded. However, 6 months later, on July 16, 2021, as the first trial was about to begin, Chen, encouraged by her lawyer, decided to fight for justice for her children. Gathering her strength, she posted a video on social media that would ignite the entire internet. When Chen revealed that the two children didn't fall by accident but were thrown from the 15th floor by their biological father, countless netizens were filled with rage. Faced with such a beastly figure, many people rushed to leave comments on the court's social media account demanding severe punishment for Zhang. On July 26, 2021, the court publicly heard the case in the first trial. The prosecution argued that Zhang and Ye had jointly committed intentional murder, resulting in the deaths of the two children, and they should be held criminally responsible for intentional homicide. Plaintiff Chen, however, stated that she would withdraw her civil lawsuit. This act translated to, she didn't want any compensation. She just wanted these two demons to pay with their lives for her children. On December 28, 2021, the court handed down its first judgment, sentencing Zhang and Yi to death for intentional homicide. After the verdict, the two defendants appealed. During the second trial, in a desperate attempt to save their lives, the two put on a farcical performance, with Ye blaming Zhang. She claimed that she was not complicit with him and that she was just an unfortunate victim. She said that when they first started dating, Zhang had coerced her into having sexual relations and she had no choice but to follow him faithfully. Ye also told the judge that she had a mental illness and requested a lighter sentence. Zhang also reversed his earlier statement, claiming that the two children's fall was an accident and that they had fallen by themselves. He said their chat records were just casual conversations and that he had not actually committed a crime. Such contradictory testimonies were naturally not enough to exonerate them. On May 11, 2023, the second trial was concluded, rejecting their appeals and upholding the original verdict. On January 31, 2024, Zhang and Ye were executed. Upon receiving the news, Chen cried uncontrollably. She choked on her words, saying that at least the two children could now rest in peace. Chen also mentioned that she planned to go with her parents to the Tiantai Temple in Chongqing, where the ashes of her children were kept, to deliver the news to them, hoping to comfort their spirits. In the latest update, in September 2025, the children's mother, Chen, revealed a new relationship on social media. May this unfortunate mother be able to start a new chapter in her life soon.